go. Okay, so you're very welcome, Roberto. Thank you very, very much for talking to us, and being the Australian, we were particularly happy to get you. I suppose the title of this was called Parents in the Eye of the Storm. And as I just said there, I think they've had a really, really hard time, and I don't think it's been acknowledged. What's been your own kind of entry to this? What brought you in, and where are you at with it?
Well, it's a good question. So I'm a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. So I guess the work I do involves seeing people for long periods of time and really trying to get to the bottom of, what's going on in their lives. I'm sure it's the same thing that you do, Stella, in your practice every day. And I kind of hadn't had a lot of contact with trans issues, even though I worked in kind of the epicenter of the LGBT community in Sydney for many, many years. But trans people weren't coming for therapy. However, I then in 2000, I really started to, I guess think about this whole issue much more deeply in 2014, when a person was referred to me, somebody who had transitioned from female to male at the age of 19. And it had been a complete disaster for this person. Everything that you said, Stella, was true for her. She had this completely watertight belief that she would become a different person who would no longer be anxious, shy, awkward, unhappy, who would have friends, who would be able to talk to people, who would feel confident, and so on and so on. And of course, none of that happened after she had all of her treatments and surgeries. And it was very disturbing actually to see I guess the extreme distress that this person was in as she came to realize, what have I done to myself? And it was through working with her over many years that, and like really painstakingly trying to look at what had led her to decide that she was really a man, that I thought, wow, this is really very complicated. It's very, very complicated. And to simply say, okay, this person says they're male or female or whatever gender, and to accept that began to really trouble me. So I then started researching and thinking I need to learn about transgender issues as much as possible. And I was even more disturbed by the fact that it seemed to me the research was terrible. Certainly the research on adolescent gender dysphoria was terrible, and the research into adult gender dysphoria was also pretty poor. And I wrote a paper about that, mostly about the weaknesses in the research, especially most of the research in this area has very, very large dropout rates. So around 30 to sometimes 50% of people in studies are not contactable at the follow-up period. So, I just began asking questions like, okay, so the 50% or 70% who are followed up seem to be doing well, but what about the 30% who we can't find? Are they okay? Are they depressed? Have they self-harmed? Have they killed themselves? And so that was really my initial my initial publication. And I then began to kind of think more about gender dysphoria in adolescence and how to understand it in a more complex way. And it was through that numerous parents began contacting me. And exactly as you said, Stella, it was heartbreaking to hear the stories and to connect with parents who were in incredible distress, who were often being treated in a very dismissive and hostile way by clinicians that they had consulted for their child, being told that they just had to accept this. And if they didn't, they were being basically transphobic or kind of unkind parents. So it really, I think your title for this seminar is really apt. Eye of the Storm is exactly what descends on these families that where a child announces that they're transgender. It's a storm that unleashes all kinds of pain and havoc within the family.
It's a particularly harrowing experience for parents, because there's almost an arc where very often the kid might declare something, but it's not quite trans. Maybe sometimes they declare they're bi or they're
Yeah.
they're queer or something like that, and the parent is nodding along. And I remember talking to a detransitioner, and she was 14 at the time, and she said to her mother, "I'm lesbian," and the mother said, "Yeah, fine." And she was, cool. I knew my mother was liberal and all that. And then a few weeks later, she said, "I'm trans," and her mother said, "No, no, you're not trans." And the detransitioner was like, "What? What's the difference? Why would you be cool about lesbian and not cool about trans?" She was 14 and didn't understand that there was a very big difference, because one required heavy medicalization for the rest of your life that had significant implications on your body, and also perhaps arguably suppressed the sexuality that seemed to be emerging. And the other just needed to be let be. And the 14-year-old in her framing just thought they're both queer. It's just different flavors of queer. What's the difference? She was 14. She's perfectly entitled to think like that. The adults in the room are also perfectly entitled to have a more informed um, outlook on it. But from then, the kid ended up, getting completely tapped into a whole system that told her, "Yeah, take a pill. There's no side effects. Off you go. It'll be great." And then by the time she was 21, 22, thinking this is not an easy life. It's a very, very difficult life. And she detransitioned. And she thought back, like, her mother was never for it. She was never supportive at any point, all the way along. And her mother had a very lonely road, told she was transphobic, told she was awful, told she was unsupportive. And there was nobody to help the mother. I really think there's an awful lot of parents who are literally traumatized by what they're going through. And they're very lonely and isolated. And I think this is today, and this weekend is the real strong push to get all the parents together and say, "You're not on your own." There's thousands of parents from parent groups all over the world who are saying, "I'm not happy with the medical treatment my child is receiving, and I want better treatment," because that's what the parents are looking for. They're looking for better treatment. Am I right in thinking that you are the same as me, Roberto? And Angus, by the way, anybody wants to send in questions, send them to Angus if you want. Could I just ask this before though? Am I right in thinking, Roberto, you were the same as me and you had gender issues as a kid? I'm not sure. Is that
I
right?
did, yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that also kind of added to my, kind of
Insight.
horror at what I was seeing. But insight, I guess, yeah. But there was a period when I was, prior to puberty where I really wanted to be a girl, and the thought of growing up to be a man frightened the hell out of me, and I didn't want it. And I kind of thought about that quite a lot as I began working with trans teens, and I thought, wow, if I'd been born in this current era, I'm sure I would have been referred by somebody to a gender clinician, and I may well have ended on that trajectory. And I'm very, very glad I didn't, because I'm quite happy now with my body and my gender. And the thought of having a lifelong medical trajectory that would not have been necessary, kind of scared me a lot. And so that certainly added to my caution around how to respond to kids who are expressing, a different gender identity. It's, I've experienced firsthand that it's something that can shift and
Yeah.
evolve over time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the same, because from the ages of in around 3, like as far back as I go, like toddlerhood, until around about 10, I had very, very strong experience, and it was very intense and it was very visceral. And I think, honestly, looking back all these years later, so you can't really trust it because it's hindsight and it's subjective, and I've been influenced by everything. But having said that, looking back, for me, I feel it was a kind of an internal misogynist. I thought just girls were just pretty rotten. I thought they were girly, which was like the worst word you could use for somebody. I thought they were weak. I thought being a boy was strong and powerful, and obviously I should be in the strong team and the powerful team. What the hell was I doing with the girls? It was like I'd been badly picked for teams. I was like, I'm moving over here. There was very strong internal misogyny, which I see again and again for people, internal misogyny and also internal misandry. The boys don't want to be boys. They're running away from who they are, I often feel, rather than running to something. And that's something you would be aware of on a psychological level. It's probably not the most satisfying thing to do, is to run away from rather than run towards. Is there any questions come in from the parents, Angus?
Yes. Essentially, the first one that came in I find very interesting. So it's, what do you say to a 21-year-old who is now just seeing an excellent therapist, but still pushing hard to get the mother to agree to surgery?
Very good question. I think this is something that comes up all the time, right, Stella? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I think even, you know, kind of prior to the kind of the desire to have surgery, there's the question around how do we respond to the child's request that we use a different name? How do we respond to the use of different pronouns? How do we respond to the desire to go on puberty blockers and hormones and so on? I think it's a very, very difficult thing to figure out. And unfortunately, there isn't a one size fits all answer. However, what I usually encourage parents to do is to be, I think the starting point for any kind of healthy family relationship has to be honesty. And if you really feel that surgery is wrong for your child, I think to pretend that you agree is probably more damaging than, you know, making the child aware that you have a different perspective, but, you know, that you will certainly try to be there for them as much as you can in every possible way. But this is one way that there's a difference that needs to be, you know, parents and kids don't agree on everything. And I think it's important for parents to be honest with themselves and honest with their children about what they think about the whole issue, and to not feel pressured into kind of acquiescing to something that doesn't feel right.
Yeah, there's an extraordinary, I'd almost say, collusion that happens in the family inadvertently. So the parents are nodding along, being, being loving, and they're nodding along, saying, "I
Yeah.
know you're going through a thing," and then, "I know you're going through a thing, and I don't want to get in on you here." And then suddenly they feel this has gone way beyond me nodding along, and I'm starting to collude in something I don't think is true, and I don't even know when that happened. It's just subtly happened. And so the parents could suddenly think, I'm almost living a lie here because I didn't call a halt out of gentleness and tenderness. And now I'm nodding to things like I just don't think is the right. And that's when I would very much back up what you're saying, Roberta, that they're 21 and they're talking about surgery. I think it's time to say your piece and to say it in as gentle and as a loving place that you can, where you kind of very much remind the child, or I know they're 21, but they are still your child, that you're worried more than anything about the burden of medical transition, as opposed to being trans without medicalization. Could be a very, very healthy choice and a very expansive choice, but medicalizing an identity feels like a kind of a postmodern contorting kind of decision that could actually bring more problems than it solves. And it won't be easy, and it'll be very hard, and it can become very heightened very quickly.
I have another question here, if I can jump in, which is somebody wants to know, Roberto, are you seeing a lot of autism in your ROGD patients, and particularly boys?
Okay, good question. But can I just make one final comment about the previous topic that we were discussing? And I mean, I think one of the things that's really hard for parents is, on the one hand, there's that collusion that you're talking about, Stella. But then on the other hand, I think sometimes when parents kind of hold their boundary around what they're prepared to accept and what they're not prepared to accept, then sometimes it's very easy for it to devolve into a full-on conflict, where the teen just digs their heels in more and more and more, and it becomes a kind of battle of wills. And I've seen that in families, and I understand, just how heated the situation is and how that can happen. And so it's tricky to try to kind of hold your truth as a parent, without getting into a kind of battle with the kids. And I think that's really the kind of the middle road that parents need to find some way to tread, I think.
So hard. It's so hard. And that's the challenge, and it's so hard. I do think you have to have boundaries of steel when there's any mental health issue. in the family, especially as a parent. You need your boundaries, but you also need your flexibility, which makes me a very flaky psychotherapist, saying on the one hand you need this, and on the other hand, it's really hard, to the point of feeling impossible. It's exhausting and tiring, and you have to look after yourself, because for some people, and for many people that I'm meeting from meetings, it's the hardest challenge of your life. This is really, really, really difficult for many people. Watching your child be in distress is devastating. Watching your child be in distress and choose what you feel are the wrong decisions, and they're going to have long implications, that's a whole other texture of distress. But yeah, the autism, I've been stunned by the numbers of autistic parents of autistic people who've come to the GDSN meetings. I knew it was high, but I didn't quite realize it was going to be quite so high. And if it wasn't ASD and autism, it was going to be OCD or ADHD or other comorbidities. I'm absolutely stunned. What is your feeling with the patients you meet?
Look, I was just kind of trying to do a quick review in my head of the teen boys that I've seen over the years, and I think pretty much all of them they really all had adolescent onset gender dysphoria. All of them, I think, were on the autism spectrum. So I think it is particularly prominent in boys, and I've certainly also seen teen girls, who are on the autism spectrum, and it's very, very, it complicates the issue somewhat, because, as parents of autistic kids will know, they're very, very rigid in the way they think about things. And, so it makes exploring, the kinds of nuances of gender and the subtleties of it a kind of a challenging undertaking. But it's certainly, I think, something that's been under-recognized. And I also think the conventional gender clinics have been minimizing just how significant the autism and other comorbidities question is.
Yeah, because it's been kind of repackaged in a way, and people are starting to say, I'm autistic and that's why I'm trans, as opposed to I'm autistic and I'm inclined towards black and white thinking, and if I don't feel one, I must be the other. Do you know what I mean? So a discomfort with your kind of gender roles and gender expectations can lead people to think that they're trans, when actually, if you're autistic, you're more likely to feel different, and you're more likely not to conform to society's kind of typical expectations of many different things. You're going to go your own way, and that's the beauty of being autistic in its own way, that you plow your own furrow. But if you plow your own furrow in this heavily gendered world, which became heavily gendered as far as I can see, mostly for money, that they realized in the 80s and 90s, make the Lego pink and blue and you'll sell more of it. And they gendered all the birthday cards, the wrapping paper, everything. And kids have grown up in a very gendered world. And for some kids who are the extreme edges of those genders, they're perfectly happy, the boy's boy and the girl's girl. And there's a whole group in the middle who are like, I don't want to be a blue boy, or I don't want to be a pink girl. And they don't suit that heavily gendered world. And I think very often the ASD kids, they don't suit it. They're not happy with it. They don't. Once they notice that there's a gender, they're like, that's not me. I don't want to be that. And where's the place for them? Where is the gender expansive, gender creative place without medicalization? That's what I think. Your paper, Roberto, One Size Does Not Fit All, I really recommend it for anybody who's working with clinicians and stuff. That, to me, that's the paper to send. I think it's absolutely. Do you want to talk a little bit about it? I think it's absolutely the one to kind of send to your clinician if you wish.
Yeah, well, look, I wrote that paper with some co-authors from SEGM, which is, I'm sure many of you know about the group, but we were looking at a paper by Jack Turbin, and he's a very, what's the right word, very vocal proponent for medical transition in youth with gender dysphoria. And one of the messages, of that paper that he was touting was that going on puberty blockers results in reduced suicidality. That was kind of one of the main messages. And we looked at that paper very carefully and saw many, many flaws in it. But also one of the most important flaws was that he did not take into account comorbidity. And you know, how many kids may have been on the autism spectrum or may have been depressed or anxious or had other kinds of problems. Somebody says Turbin is an ideologue, and I think that's probably true. He's certainly an activist clinician, that's for sure.
And I'm sure he'd have his views that he's doing his thing, and we all do. But I think it's very important that we penetrate all the research. And so if somebody is saying something simple, I remember you once said this, Roberto, it's so true. You said, you know, that the narrative is simple, and we have to complexify the narrative because these are complex cases. And I thought, nail on the head. That's exactly, anybody who's giving you a simplistic slogan for any of this, I just think it's not true. These are complex cases. Sorry, I jumped in. Go ahead.
That's all right. I mean, I think that's kind of pretty much the nub of the paper, is that we, you know, his conclusion was that basically people who said that they wished they'd had puberty blockers at a young age were not doing as well later on in life as those who had received puberty blockers. And, you know, one of the things that was not taken into account was that maybe the kids that weren't given puberty blockers had multiple other problems, such as autism, depression, anxiety, and so on. And so their outcome, the outcome that they seemed to be doing worse, could be due to a whole range of factors, you know, including their pre-morbid psychological state. They may have been more distressed and more unwell, I guess, than some of the kids that got puberty blockers. So, but yes, I was just flowing onto your comment about the complexity of it. I mean, I think that's a really important thing to for us as therapists to keep talking about, because there is, I think, a message that is being promoted in the media that trans is a thing. Like, you don't need to really think about it. You don't need to look at it in any depth. If someone's trans, it's an identity and end of story. Just kind of run with it. Whereas, you know, I think that trans identification in teens is one little piece of a complex, I don't know, kind of tapestry of all kinds of things that are going on in a young person's life. And they're all interrelated. So that could mean anxiety, interpersonal social difficulties. It could mean autism. It could mean depression. Could mean family breakdown. It could mean all kinds of things. And the gender dysphoria is intricately interconnected with all of those things. And so to kind of say that you can just pull out the gender dysphoria as a kind of encapsulated problem and just treat that absolutely makes no sense to me. And it doesn't make any sense just in terms of the whole tradition of child and adolescent psychiatry, you know, to look at children in such a mechanical way. So, and I think there isn't really any, there's no single formula that we can use to look at what's going on in a young person who says that they're transgender. I think every transgender child is unique. Every transgender identifying child is unique. And the challenge is to kind of try and help them become more aware of themselves and how they relate and what their real difficulties are. As you said, Stella, with the narrative, I think, you know, kids often come in absolutely convinced that their only problem is that they're transgender, and if they just get this fixed, everything will be fine. And so what I try to do is to kind of firstly slow that down, and then to kind of say, look, let's look at things very carefully to try to understand why you're so unhappy, or why you're so anxious, or what else is going on in your life that you hadn't maybe thought about. And it's interesting, it's universally the case that there are plenty of other things going on in the child's life that the child wraps up in the kind of transgender story. And it's very, very appealing because, you know, it provides a wonderful, an apparently wonderful solution where there's a kind of a fantasy of complete transformation into a new person, as you said.
I think as well that, like, a lot of, especially these kids, I think about this quite a lot, that and I'm a mother and I've done it with my own kids, that like up until around about the age of 12, especially with the Disney and all the films and all the content the kids are watching until the age of 12 or so, it's very much, if you think hard enough, you can do it. If you wish hard enough, you can do it. Don't worry, the good always works. All the let it go and all that sort of stuff. The good wins. And if you're just good and hard. And then they hit pubescence and adolescence. And suddenly, oh my God, that brick wall of reality of actually sometimes bad people get on better. And sometimes the fake mean friend ends up much more popular and ends up in a better position than the nice kid. And some awful things happen in life, awfully unfair, awful kind of realities they're faced with. And I don't think they're quite ready for it. Like I say, guilty myself, because they've been taught this narrative of, the good will always win. And then somewhere along the way, they think, oh no, I'm in the wrong thing. There must be a better life. I'm in the wrong life, is what they're thinking. Because this life that they've been almost sold isn't good and simple. It's complicated and it's all wrong. And that's the banner. This is all wrong. And I need something different. And the massiveness of be somebody different. Take a pill and just whiteboard that, just reset. It feels very digital. It feels very like the new way of thinking, like we've almost become robots, that we can just dismiss our bodies, dismiss the messiness of our whatever's going on in our mind, and reset. And it feels like it's no accident this is the digital generation that are coming up with this. I am noticing that Scott Nugent is here. If he wants to say a couple of words, he's very welcome. I know you were there, Scott. And for anybody who knows Scott, he runs TRE Voices. Are you there, Scott? Do you want to speak? Unmute yourself if you do. Yeah, maybe Angus, if you can ask a question. Scott, if you want to speak, you're very welcome to.
Well, I can anytime anybody wants me to.
Yeah, go on, speak now, sure. Forever hold your peace.
I guess I'm Scott Nugent. I'm a transgender man. I'm 48 years old. I have an organization called TRE Voices, Trans Rational Educational Voices. It's a group of trans who are adamantly against medically transitioning kids, and also for biology and women's rights. And you'd be surprised how many of us are absolutely shocked to figure out what's going on and what they're doing with kids. I just happened to get sick from trans health 17 months, and trying to save my life, I learned a whole hell of a lot about transgender health than I ever thought possible. And each time I would turn that page, my jaw would drop, and so once I started to get on Twitter and I started to realize that kids were medically transitioning, I was shocked. I mean, I was absolutely unequivocally shocked. And it wasn't until the day when my daughter was like 12 years old and she said, I think I might be trans. And I went, what? And I said, holy. So that's when I kind of jumped in about 2 years ago. And through that process, when I first started this, I thought that maybe I was the only trans that thought that way. But as I started to become more vocal, I realized after talking to hundreds of trans that most trans regret some form of transitioning. I mean, I have yet to meet somebody that said it was beautiful and it saved my life completely and totally. With that being said, I have met a couple of people that have really, really come to life and it really helped enhance their life, but not very many. And there's so many complications to it. And I'll just say one thing and I'll shut Stella up.
You're always welcome.
The thing that's hard to uncover with this. Now, keep in mind, I was a lesbian for 24 years, still am. I just don't look like one. And then trans man for 6 years. So I've been in the LGBT my whole life. And if you listen to the trans ideology, they're backing up what gay people were trying to tell people for 50 years, which is we're not going to go after your kids. This is about, the LGBT was a soft place to fall. It wasn't recruiting system. Now it's like, like those sales things when you sell lotions, go get your friend and sell that lotion. You know, it seems like that's what the LGBT has kind of turned into. But you have to understand, and I know that we all want to be the people that are not the bigots, we're not the hated people, but you have to understand that what's happening to kids has absolutely unequivocally nothing to do with the LGBTQ. It has nothing to do with human rights. It has to do with two things. It has to do with the fact that medical transition does help some people, not very many. So it should be available, and they shouldn't discriminate against that there. The other side that you need to listen to is the financial side. And I've talked to Stella about this, and being in business sales, I think I'm able to convey this message a little bit better than a lot of people. So I'll just say it in 2 minutes. In the UK, there was a study that found that the percentage of increase within an 8-year period of time, 10-year period of time, was a 4,000% increase in that area of kids that thought that they were transgender and they needed to get on puberty blockers or hormones, all that kind of stuff. Well, if you take that number and you don't do anything, and you keep that number the same, you don't increase it, you don't decrease it, and you spread that out, those numbers and kids to adult ratio across the countries of Canada, and I did these numbers in US, in the UK, in Europe, you take those, what would our society look like in 20 years if nothing changed? And the thing is that we would have between 18 and 22% of the population would be transgender and would be on hormones and would be on hormone blockers. Now, what does that mean financially? Well, what that means financially is that every child they convince is transgender, it's $1.3 million in pharmaceuticals over a lifetime. We're not talking about surgery. We're not talking about other things. Now, we are in a business place where Netflix is trying to get $2. You know, they're trying to get $2 a month because that's the type of business model we're in, right? Businesses want to be able to forecast what they're going to make every month so they can work around it. It's business success. It's the main model right now. So what we're seeing is a main model for companies, for some pharmaceuticals, to figure out how much money that they're going to make. The trans industry is not just $1 million industry. It's not $1 billion industry. This is $1 trillion industry, and it is enormous.
That's the potential for it, and they know the potential for it. I think that that's very, very well said. I want to just bring in a question here because I'm acutely aware of Roberto's time, and I want to just ask this. Now, we're saying this is parents in the eye of the storm. Well, here's an eye of the storm question. Tomorrow, somebody says, I have a meeting with hospital staff. My 18-year-old with a diagnosis of ASD from a young age is currently in inpatient care. Any advice? Pretty scary situation.
Before Roberto answers, and you think, but I just want to point out there is a great book by Marcus and Sue Evans just released, and I would definitely have that book, or certainly the link to that book, as a kind of a complexifying the narrative. But work away there, Roberto.
So Angus, so just so that I can understand properly, this 18-year-old is identifying as trans, is that right, and is currently in inpatient care?
It doesn't actually say is identifying as trans. It's kind of far back in the chat now. I can't actually remember who asked it, but if somebody wants to come in with a message, I assume that that's kind of implied. Oh, it's yeah, hold on, here we go.
Okay.
I don't know, but let's oh yes, no, I've just okay, it's just been confirmed. Yes, identifying as trans, yeah.
Okay. Look, that I imagine the parents of this child are feeling pretty scared. I mean, I have been receiving calls from parents now who are actually afraid to take their child to see conventional psychiatrists, or even to take them for admission to hospital if that's what's required, because the child has been expressing, trans identification, and the fear is that whoever takes over their care in the hospital, or whichever psychiatrist they see, will put them on the transition pathway. So I imagine that's what's being raised here in terms of how to deal with this situation and this child. I mean, I think it's tricky because we're talking about an 18-year-old who is, technically able to make their own decision. But I think as parents, the best thing to do is to try to request time with the treating clinician to try to give them as much background about your child as possible. Because I think, I think we've all seen this, that when teens present to us, they often gloss over, what the real difficulties are in their lives, because there's a real desire to convince everybody that they should be allowed to transition. So I think that's key, is kind of trying to find a way to speak to the clinician and, without getting into a debate about it, but kind of saying, this is complicated. Are you aware of this? Are you aware of that? And so on.
It makes me think of Fritz Perls. He's a kind of a very well-known from back in the day psychiatrist. I think he's German born, and he founded Gestalt therapy. And I remember him saying this line, when a client comes in, there's what's going on, and now what's really going on. And anybody who's worked in therapy, somebody might come into me today and they might say, I want to leave my husband. And then 6 weeks in, they might say, yeah, I am concerned about my alcohol consumption. This is really common, that they come in with one and something else arises, and actually they were almost testing me on this one so that they could come to the real issue, if you follow me. This is a common scenario, but because I would argue that the narrative has been simplified, and so would you, I think, Roberto, that what's going on is being kind of brandished as the everything. And what I think I would say to that parent, and my heart goes out to you, because if you feel your child is receiving inappropriate treatment, it's a really frightening place to be. I would try to take heart from our movement. I would join Genspect today, and we'll be telling you more about Genspect later on, but very much say there's a worldwide movement of parents who are unhappy with the treatment that their children are receiving. There's a book just recently released by Marcus and Sue Evans talking about gender dysphoria and talking about taking a depth perspective. I was at the seminar yesterday with Roberto D'Angelo, who wrote this paper, Not One Size Fits All. Can I please ask you to hasten slowly, as that great phrase is, because your job as the doctor of my 18-year-old is to first do no harm. And I worry that you're missing things and you're simplifying this. I think that's how it go in. How it'll go down, I don't know, and I'm sure it's going to be very difficult. I am conscious we're taking your time, Roberto, and I don't want to steal.
That's fine. Totally fine. It's Sunday afternoon, so I have plenty of time. It's not a problem.
You want to give one last question to Roberto there, Angus, and then we'll move on to the information about Genspect and something.
So what do you do within yourself? This was quite a long question, and I'm kind of interpreting it, and I'm also drawing into it one time here, but essentially, what do you do within yourself when everything seems like the wrong thing to do? So again, the eye of the storm, every direction. What do you do within yourself? How do you talk to that child? How do you deal with that child?
Very good question. I think one of the things that I think can be invaluable is for parents to join groups like Genspect or some place that they can get support. I also think sometimes it can actually be very helpful for parents to get their own therapy to kind of help them think about what's going on and how to respond and how to navigate this kind of minefield that they're in. I think one of the things that is just a part of this whole experience for families is that it's going to be difficult, and there will be distress, there will be disagreement. Your child will not be happy with you. But I think, I don't know, like I think about my own adolescence, and I think, that's just part of the way adolescence works. We're always at odds with our parents, and there's kind of conflict and disagreement. And that doesn't, at least when I was growing up, it didn't lead to my parents kind of acquiescing to my every demand. There was a way that the distress was tolerated. So again, I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is I think that the most important thing is to try not to alienate the child. And that's difficult. But to try to avoid not getting into a kind of standoff where everybody is just digging their heels in, and it's about winning the argument rather than, really trying to talk about what's going on. I mean, I think sometimes it can also help to just take the focus off gender a little bit, and maybe stop talking about it so much, and maybe not get too excited about it when it's raised, and not kind of get alarmed, and maybe try to just kind of keep in mind, that there's much more going on here in this young person's life than just their gender, and to kind of maybe dwell in some of those other areas more, rather than getting pulled into the kind of gender conflicted kind of debate.
I think that's a really good point. More than anything, I find that especially children like who are really hell-bent on, I have a solution and I'm going to sell my solution to everybody, and my solution is that I medically transition, become a different person. I think they're very much trying to narrow their world to all roads lead to gender, and I think it's the role of the parent, and it's very, very difficult, is to expand their world, no matter what it is, just expand their world, bring them beyond. Well, there's also, let's watch a film, let's have a lovely dinner, let's go out, hiking, anything. And I know this is really hard because all they want to do is gender everything, but you're trying to expand it to somebody's world. There's a lovely line from Rumi, the poet, something like, beyond right doing and wrong doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. And I think that's lovely for parents to be talking to the kid. Like, it's like, can we just go beyond right doing and who's right and who's wrong, and let's just meet in the place of love, because I adore you, I'm on your side, we're just taking a different view on this, but can we meet somewhere else? Can we just watch a film? So I know sometimes that's impossible. I do know this is a really hard thing. Thank you, Roberto. You've been very, very good. Were you going to say something there? Sorry.
I was just going to say one final thing, which is something that I've observed quite a lot in working with trans identifying teens, is that I think, like separating from your parents, kind of protesting, rebelling, kind of having your own mind and pushing back against the parents is part of what adolescence is about. And my impression is that in a lot of the kids that I've seen, trans identification becomes the way to assert a kind of separate identity. Like, I'm me, I'm not you. I'm not going to be the kind of person you want me to be. I'm going to be my own person. So I think, kind of, that's why I think backing off from that kind of, from a debate about that is helpful, and maybe trying to find other ways to facilitate a sense of autonomy and growth and freedom in your child is probably going to be really helpful. So that whatever they're trying to navigate by, pushing for the gender transition, they might get a sense of grown-upness and, and autonomy, through other means. So I think that's worth thinking about.
I think that's so true. I think just to back that up, I often think this is key, that these are compulsively compliant children sometimes, and the only thing that makes them stand on is this one. Yeah. And I know when I'm working with kids who are overly compliant, you're trying to teach them their strong voice, you're trying to teach them to say no. And, this might be the only time that they're taking a stand. And so you make sure that they have other opportunities to take a stand in other places in life, so that they learn to assert themselves. Exactly. And sometimes when you're first learning to assert yourself, you're very aggressive with it. And, it's teaching them. It's a long, long road, and it's really hard. But thank you. You've been amazing.
Thank you, Stella.
Thanks,
this has been great. Yeah. Thanks, Angus. And I hope that this group is useful to all of you. So I think it's very important for parents and us clinicians to begin to change the narrative that's out there and to present a different voice. So you're all here doing that, which is amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll go on. Thanks a million, Roberto.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, we're going to go on and share the screen so that people realize really, I suppose, why we have brought this, why we have kind of created Genspect, and why we think it's very important. And the reason, more than anything, I'm just getting the screen up here. The reason more than anything is because we feel that there's a movement. There's a movement of parents, and there's thousands of you, and you're all saying the same thing. You're all saying, I am not happy with the treatment my child is receiving. As you know, I'm a psychotherapist, I'm sure you know that now, and I'm involved with a huge amount of organizations that are all very much involved in complexifying the narrative and questioning the narrative and trying to provide a depth perspective. So for example, SEGM provide great research, and RIME also provide great kind of information around identity medicine. I'm in the GDSN, that's support meetings, and Genspect isn't really running support meetings at all, well, not at all. What we're trying to do is bring the voice of the parents to the mainstream media. I'm also in the IATDD. Some people might know what that is. That's the International Association for Therapists of Detransitioners and Desisters. And also, just so you know, to give you heart, because I really think that the narrative is changing and life is changing. There's like irreversible damage, you know, Abigail Schreier's book, that wasn't out a year ago. So many things weren't out, you know, 18 months ago. Kira Bell hadn't happened, you know, so many things hadn't happened, and they're happening now, and they're happening hard and fast. The court cases are coming. The court cases are on right now. Sonia Appleby's court case has just been kind of taken part in the UK, and also Kira Bell's appeal is happening in Tuesday, and I know there will be kind of difficulties for some of the kind of results of that. However, it's putting it into the mainstream eye. People are finding out about detransitioners, they're finding out about safeguarding and things like that. But just so you know, the last 2 points in this slide, GETA, Gender Exploratory Therapy Association, is on its way, and also Thoughtful Therapists, which is an organisation for therapists in the UK and Ireland who wish to bring about a better memorandum of understanding about conversion therapies, because we feel that the memorandum of understanding on conversion therapy isn't great. So you might be wondering, what exactly is Genspect? It's an international alliance of parent groups and professionals whose aim is to advocate for the parents of gender questioning children. That's what we're doing, we're advocating. We're a forward-facing organisation, and we're focused on opening this subject up into the mainstream media. There's plenty of parent support groups, and we're delighted that that's not what we're doing. We're trying to get into the media. And why was it set up? It was set up to give a voice to parents of gender questioning children and young people. Many parents are concerned that their children aren't receiving appropriate treatment and support and don't feel free to speak out about their concerns. So Genspect are going to say loudly and publicly that thousands of parents are unhappy with the treatment paths their gender questioning kids have been put on. And we favour a more holistic investigation for those distressed children. And so what we will be doing is we'll be hopefully be on the radio, we'll be on the newspapers, we'll be on all sorts of mainstream media and the social media, and we'll be saying this message. And your job as parents is, one, to subscribe so that we are, a very strong movement with heavy numbers, and we won't overkill you with emails and things like that. But what we do send you will be very relevant to you and your child's kind of path as such. We're aware there's loads of other brilliant organisations, for example, SEGM, which Roberto is in, which promotes evidence-informed healthcare. RIME, which I mentioned earlier, improving ethical long-term treatment and care for gender dysphoric youth. The IATD, I mentioned them earlier. Transgender Trend and Fourth Wave Now were both the kind of the originals really back in 2015 and 2016. And at last night's webinar, Stephanie Davis-Arai from Transgender Trend came on and she spoke. And make sure, if anybody wants to speak, make sure you let it be known through Angus. Safe Schools Alliance is a brilliant organisation focused on the UK, and there's going to be many more of them in Australia and elsewhere. Gender Health Query, Partners for Ethical Care, and Thoughtful Therapists. There are lots of organisations out there. We're the organisation that are trying to bring the parents' voices to the media.
Can I jump in really, really quickly? Because somebody's just said something very interesting in the chat, which is Genspect doing anything to support or reinforce the idea that parents are the best equipped people in the world to care for their children and to make decisions for them? And I want to push this. That is the absolute beating heart of what we're saying. That is the absolute beating heart of it. There's other stuff we're saying as well, but at the basis of it, we're saying absolutely. The parent knows the child. The parent knows what the child at the age of whatever, 2, 3, wouldn't eat, wouldn't do, and all the rest of it. So that's completely at the core, and I want us to own that.
Yeah, parents have been dethroned and they've been dismissed. And this is a kind of a general movement to kind of denigrate parents that's happened in the last 20, 30 years. I wrote a book called Cottonwool Kids in 2015, where I decried this. And I was saying it's awful the way parents have been dismissed. Like up until the kind of 90s, late 80s, it was mother knows best. and there was a huge amount of respect. Okay, mothers mightn't have had all that much respect in other realms, but with parenting, they were listened to, because it was very much consensus that the mother knows the child best. Beyond anything else, the mother knows the child best. Now that's gone, and now parents are being dismissed, and it's awful. So one of the things we are very focused on in Genspect is giving respect back to the parents and making sure the parents hold their authority, and we help them hold their authority, that your voice is very important, because it's very likely that you're in the top 2%, 3% of people who know your child. It's very likely you know your child much, much better than the professional who's looking at you. And we have to own our authority. There's the parent support group, that are available, and there's many more, and make sure that you let us know if we're missing any. There's some great groups out there, the Bayswater have been so instrumental in bringing about Keir Bell and the Mrs. A case in the UK, and that's had huge impact, and Janet in Sweden, and the trans train. What's very interesting about the popular culture is the film The Trans Train came out in I think it was 2019 in Sweden. Whatever year it came out, when it came out, the numbers applying to get puberty blockers and to seek treatment fell off a cliff. It was an incredible impact with that film in Sweden, The Trans Train. And there's an example of getting into the mainstream media, getting into the hearts and minds of the general public, is how we can change a narrative. And I think the narrative needs to be changed, as you've heard me say. But thankfully, in Sweden, no longer are the Karolinska using puberty blockers. And in Finland, no longer are they recommending the use of puberty blockers. Things are changing. And for you as a parent, especially in Australia, you need to start talking about Europe and puberty blocker and reviewing. People are reviewing puberty blocker in the gold standard of trans healthcare, which is the Karolinska, which has, this is where the most long-term study on transitioning that ever took place was from Sweden in the Karolinska. And now this gold standard of trans healthcare are no longer recommending the use of puberty blockers. So the more you're aware of things like that, the more equipped you'll be. So we're going to provide a platform for parents. Until now, loving and engaged parents' voices have been dismissed. We aim to rectify this. We emphasize the vital role that parents play in their children's well-being. We aim to raise parents' concerns about the treatment their children are receiving. And we recognize that parents have been hamstrung by the need for anonymity. We aim to overcome this obstacle with carefully chosen representatives, like myself, like Angus, like Claire Graham, who's also a representative, Julia Mason, who I think I saw her name, and thank you very much, because I don't know if the hours suit for Julia because she's over in America, but she's here as far as I know. And Kathleen Dooley, and some great parents and professionals that have been all making up Genspect. And that's what we are, a combination of professionals and parents. The Genspect represents parents, not the other way around. The members of our core team must be faithful in articulating Genspect's position, but the parents we represent have no such obligation. You can do what you want as parents and still be part of Genspect. As a parent working with Genspect, we encourage you to continue as a member of any other organisation, such as a parent support forum, political campaign, or religious group. You do as you wish. What we're trying to do is harness all the voices and say, listen, there's a big movement and we're all saying the same thing. And this needs to be kind of acknowledged by the clinicians who are treating our children. I think I'll hand it over to you, Angus, and do you want to take over from this? Are you able to move the slides yourself?
I'm not, but can I just say move on to the next slide?
Yeah,
that'll be nice and quick.
You can. Yeah, I will be your slide mover.
Excellent. Lovely. So our team is Stella O'Malley. You may have heard of her. We've got Pam Buffone, who took on the Canadian education system, where she saw what was going on with her own daughter. We've got Kathleen Dooley. We've got the wonderful Claire Graham. We've got Julia, who's here. I saw her in the chat. She says she's a bit sleepy, but she's still here. So that's all we ask. We've got Avi Ring, who's wonderful, lovely chap. We've got Marit Randstad, who's a teacher from Norway. And then we've also got the anonymous parent. And when I show you the website, you'll see what that represents. It's really, there are so many people who are working with us who feel that they can't be as open as they would like so many people in this. And it's important to us to credit them and to say that they're also working away behind the scenes, doing everything they can, getting involved. So we've then got a wonderful slate of advisors. I mean, this is kind of the aristocracy of people who are very, very well informed about this and have made it their life really to be engaged in this. We've got Sasha, and if you like Sasha, then go back and listen to our first webinar. That was great. So that was last night. We've got Roberto, who we just heard from. We've got Stephanie Davis-Arai, who of course has been in this really from the very beginning. We've got Marcus and Sue Evans, who left the Tavistock, and there's a great Gender a Wider Lens episode talking to both of them together, which I found fascinating and really, really just lays out exactly what has happened here with this therapeutic model and how it's gone wrong. We've got Az Hakim, who's extremely knowledgeable about all of this. We've also got Erin Kimberley, who is a trans man and a mental health nurse. We've got Stephen Levine, who will be very well known to people within this, particularly at the sort of the research end of things. Continuing in that vein, we've got Lisa Littman, who of course did this seminal study, which really made irreversible damage possible. We've got Lisa Marciano, who has been very helpful to various different parent communities and all of this. Then we've got Abigail Schreier, who of course wrote Irreversible Damage, which has changed so many people's lives. We've got brilliant Sinead Watson, who's spoken with just a very beautiful honesty about her own journey and what went wrong for her in the system. And then we've got Jane Wheeler, who is the president of Read to Think Identity Medicine Ethics as well. So we've really got all of these different people who've come in with lots of different perspectives. And so our viewpoints, which will be articulated and which you'll see later in this presentation, they're very much thought out. It's not just something which has just been written down. This is the culmination of many, many years of thought for a lot of people. So what will we do? What are we actually going to do in concrete terms? Well, we're going to open up a public dialogue about the complexity of gender and identity development. We're going to highlight the role the media play here, because these vulnerable kids, they're being steered towards this one simple panacea, this singular explanation for their distress, and that's taking them into lifelong medical intervention. And that is something that the media has a role in. And we want to talk about that. And we're going to be confident in lobbying politicians and journalists and clinicians and educators so they can understand that complexity. So they can't just run away from it into this very simple explanation. If I can get you to move on to the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're grand. So we, even more concrete now, we're going to write articles, and we're going to ghostwrite articles so that parent stories can actually be told. Some people aren't that confident in writing their own story. We're going to help them. We're going to book TV and radio interviews and podcasts. So we're going to get parents who are prepared to speak. Maybe they're prepared to have their voice out there. Maybe they're prepared to go further than that. And we're going to get them into the mainstream. So we're not just preaching to the converted. One thing which we're really excited about is the idea of creating fresh and engaging graphic and animation content, presenting these issues that young people are facing, these gender questioning kids, in a very accessible way. There's been a bit of a gap there. This is a very visual generation. They're really, really visual. And that's something where we've fallen a little bit behind. So we intend to address that, and we're excited about that. We are going to broadcast our own exclusive content that gives you a chance to hear from the people who are making the news in their own words. We've seen so much, these cases, all of these different stories going on, and we really want to get into that and share them. We're going to host webinars for parents like this one, and we're going to help people share ideas back and forth with the leading specialists and get advice. We're going to generate, well, we're already generating working relationships between parents and clinicians so that the real story, the actual things that you are going through, gets connected into the science, into the research. Very importantly, as a consequence of all of this, we're uniting thousands of parents from hundreds of disparate support groups. We're the outward face. We're not a support group. What we're doing is we're taking that and we're launching that into the wider world so that people can hear it and people can understand, okay, just because my kid is going through this and saying such and such, it does not necessarily mean that is something I fully agree with. There is a tension here, and I have a right to have my voice heard too. And then we're also open. If there's anything else, just let us know. Can I get you to skip on to the next one? So politics and religion, this is important. We are non-partisan, we're independent. We have members who come from across the political spectrum who hold a range of personal beliefs. And there's a piece that you'll see on the website where I really kind of go into that and what that actually means in real terms. Our interest relates exclusively to the well-being and safeguarding of children and young people. It does not extend to party, political, or religious allegiance. So we welcome people of all faiths and none. If I can get you to skip on, lovely. Our focus is on health is that we want to campaign for informed decisions that prioritize long-term health. We want to advocate for an evidence-based approach to gender distress. We want to encourage healthcare professionals. We want them to have the confidence so that they can evaluate the low evidence base for the current affirmative approach. They can look more closely at the harms that medical treatment paths can cause. And we want better quality research. We want to advocate for that by liaising with clinicians and bringing parents into that conversation. We want people to be more aware. There are a number of things that you hear. I mean, some of you will know that I kind of got into this by telling parents stories, and you start to realize they never repeat, but they always rhyme. There are these features which come up over and over again. We want to raise awareness of the role that sexuality can play and the way that that can be conflated with gender. We want to talk about the high occurrence of autism, ADHD, other comorbidities, the impact of trauma on identity formation, the lack of high quality peer-reviewed evidence for the current treatment path for gender questioning young people. And also, critically important, we want people to be aware of the significant risks of medical interventions that will impact our children for the rest of their lives. So you can hear in what Stella said at the beginning that, they think that they can just take a pill and that they'll become a new person. Well, no, it's not quite that simple. In fact, it's a lot more complicated than that. And in terms of education, we want to see all educational establishments hold a neutral space for students so they can explore their gender, their sexual orientation, their identity formation. We value supportive environments, which means that they don't feel encouraged or discouraged to follow a certain path, that it is truly supporting them. We recognize that they need to be free to explore all aspects of their gender, sexual orientation, identity formation, so long as it doesn't take them into a destructive place. And we're encouraging educational establishments to maintain an open and supportive environment, which is based on the principle of informed safeguarding. This is a little more concrete in some countries than others. There are some countries where safeguarding has done rather better. And we want to have that conversation about how different jurisdictions might be treating us and what they can learn from one another as well.
Thank you, Angus. I really want to emphasize to people that it's kind of our job to kind of to come together and to unite. And so if you're in lots of different parents groups, and I'm delighted people are, but the more we can mix and merge, and that's why I love that the chat is so lively and so many people are speaking, and so that Australia are brought in through into Europe and into America, and that more and more and more. And I've really seen it with Genspect since we started. We got started, I suppose, early spring, I think, this year, and we started kind of organizing ourselves to get this out. But please do be vocal on Twitter. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, and make sure, like I saw somebody mention on Mumsnet, they mentioned Genspect, and they kind of wonder what it is. I'd really like if one of you did kind of start a thread on Mumsnet. It's such a powerful place in many ways. Maya Forstater, Posey Parker, they all began on Mumsnet. So make sure that you use things like Mumsnet and Twitter and whatever else to get our message out, because we're relying on you and you're relying on us to kind of get ourselves out. So what is our position? We want to help create a society that supports gender nonconformity without requiring the heavy burden of lifelong medical transition. I suppose the big emphasis is, why do we need to medicalize our identities? To me, I just don't think we need to. Why can't we be gender expansive? Why can't we be gender creative? Why would we need to take a pill to kind of to solidify any identity. In this fast-paced world, we advocate for a slower, more thoughtful approach to any difficulties that children and young people face, and we favour a biopsychosocial approach that includes the holistic view of the individual. We go for the whole person, including the bullying, the trauma, the loneliness, the influence on online, whatever it is, we bring it all in. So our position, now this is all on the website, and our website is pretty phenomenal, and Angus will show it to us. But basically there is one part of the website that shows our position. So I'll just flick through this fairly quickly. Gender could be, we could do a whole seminar on gender. Gender is a very, very, very wide word, but what we're saying here is the culturally variable set of behavior and personality expectations applied to sex bodies. We believe that there are many routes that lead to the development of distress about a gender, and equally there are just as many routes out of such distress. So there's lots of routes into gender distress, there's lots of routes out, and we want to make sure that they're all being included. We seek a wider range of treatment options and more evidence-based approaches for gender questioning children and young people. And for those of you who are facing clinicians today and tomorrow and next week, make sure you know that the evidence base for affirmative care is low. It's a low quality evidence base. WPATH, the famous WPATH say it themselves, it's a low quality evidence base, the evidence base for affirmative care. It's the new kid in town, it's the new kid on the block. It only arrived maybe 10 or so years ago. There is no long-term evidence base for affirmative care. When I say it only arrived for gender 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Before that, they were using affirmative care for, let's say, people with who are gay or lesbian or bi. So our position on identity formation, we appreciate that identity formation is an important psychosocial stage of development for youths from pubescence to early adulthood, and this can present as an identity crisis. And we believe that a change in identity can sometimes seem like a concrete resolution of a trauma, leading young people into the mistaken belief that they can leave their old selves behind them. And like I said earlier to Roberto, about they hit the brick wall of reality when they hit adolescence, that they have limitations and their body has limitations and they don't want it and they're resisting it and they want something different. And it's a very alluring idea that you can be somebody different. So as far as the very contentious age of medical transition, we're in favor in the rights of mature adults to make their own informed decisions. And that's our position. We want to raise the bar on informed consent, and informed should mean informed. The current state of the research indicates that most people do not fully mature until their mid-20s. Around about 25, the brain is fully formed in terms of cognitive function and the development of the personality. And this is the reason we have grave qualms about anybody below this age making the decision to transition. We also believe that those classed as vulnerable adults can take even longer to develop a stable and social sexual identity. The vulnerable adults are given that little bit more room to mature because they don't mature at the same kind of rate of development as neurotypical adults. Our position on puberty blockers, we're against puberty blockers for gender dysphoria for the following reasons. Now, we support, of course, puberty blockers for precocious puberty. And, you know, it's completely different context. And in a way, I almost don't even read it as the same because it's such a different context. But puberty blockers for gender dysphoria we're against. But why? Because they're an experimental treatment program, because they're drugs that can make irreversible changes to young bodies, because there's no country in which they've been licensed to treat children with gender dysphoria, and because they block sexual development, sexual desire, organ growth, and cognitive function. And that doesn't even cover the unknown long-term effects. So we've made it very clear what our position is on puberty blockers. Our position on children and young people, and that is our focus. We're focusing on the parents who are unhappy with their treatment of the children and young people are receiving. We don't believe children or young people are equipped to make lifelong decisions about medical transition procedures. We think adolescence and young adulthood is a key developmental stage during which identity is evolving. We believe that young people should be encouraged to accept and to love their bodies. And we do, however, support the rights of mature adults to make informed healthcare choices regarding medical transition. Our position on sexuality is we wholeheartedly support the rights of lesbian, gay, and bi people. We're proud to include many lesbian, gay, and bi members and supporters in our organisation. We abhor bigotry and homophobia and have a zero tolerance policy towards such forms of discrimination. We acknowledge that lesbian, gay, and bi youth are often gender non-conforming. Rather than suppressing sexual urges with medication, We support an approach that allows adolescents to explore their sexuality with freedom and acceptance. I do think sexuality is being subsumed at the moment by gender. It's something it's something that's really concerning me, that young people, they're not in touch with their sexuality. We value open, for the trans community, we value open and honest discussion between members of the trans community and others to ensure that strongly held beliefs about sex and gender do not overpower one another. Everybody should have room to speak. We've no prejudice against trans people in any way. 2 of the Genspect advisors have transitioned and 1 remains a trans man. Contentious issues should be worked through respectfully. So long as that condition is met, we welcome contributions from trans people. Some people think we should change our bodies. Others think we should change our minds. Both viewpoints have their merits, and discussion between the 2 should be possible. So finally, we're coming to the end of our presentation. And you will get this presentation if you subscribe to Genspect. And we really hope you subscribe to Genspect. We're on, the website's out, genspect.org. You can follow us on Twitter at Genspect, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, Genspect International. Help us with national and local media contacts. If you've got national and local media contacts, email info@genspect.org, tell us and put us in touch, give us the information, go and do our little bit of work by, saying this is the organization, this is the radio. I do think radio is untapped, by the way. It's a very untapped medium in this context. Join the Genspect Parents Forum. That will be set up in the next couple of weeks. Make a donation if you can. We've had a really, really lovely, haven't we, Angus? We've had a really lovely response so far. We're only open since kind of halfway through Friday. We've only launched
36 hours,
yeah.
Maybe pushing 48. I don't know. And we've had a very generous donation overnight of $1,000 or euros, whichever it was. And it shows that people believe in what we want to do, and we're very, very grateful and very, very humbled by the faith that they've put in us. It's really touching, I have to say.
And if you're ready to speak out, email alex@genspect.org. If you want to be a voice on the radio as a parent and say your story, you can anonymize your details, or you can not. There's lots of different ways to speak out. You can help us by, supporting us on Twitter. You can help us by subscribing, by spreading the word. There's lots of ways to do it. You don't have to put yourself out there, but you do have to, I would argue, it would be nice if you subscribed, for example.
Yeah.
And subscribe doesn't cost anything.
Can I just say something about subscribing?
Yeah.
So subscribing is our starting point. So we'll tell you how to join the Genspect forum. It also gives you a means to continue contacting us and to stay in contact with us. If you do want to investigate your options about telling your story, if you do want to talk about how you could anonymize certain things to protect your own identity, to protect the identity of your child, the starting point is subscribe. And from there, you'll kind of be in and get into the community, and you can see everything that we're offering and how we can work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've got something extraordinary here. There's so many parents are coming together finally. And now is our time to move. I think times have changed. Angus, would you be able to share your screen? I know you're co-host, and to get up the website.
I think I can, yeah.
And get up the website so people can see the website. Just so you know, towards the end, we welcome people to come on and to talk after Angus has shown us the website. You don't have to show your face, but if you want, you're welcome to. If you want, I'll turn off, after Angus shows us the website, I'll turn off the recording and people can talk just to say your story or to say whatever you want to say. I think it's good for people to feel less lonely, because I just feel so many people have been misunderstood. So many parents have been called transphobic when they're not transphobic. What they are is deeply concerned about their lost and lonely child. And I want to build a community more than anything. I think it's really important. So work away, Angus.
Okay,
tell us about the fabulous website that Angus did.
This is our website. So you can see up here, you've got your social media icons so that you can connect with us on social media. You've got subscribe. There's the donate button here. And then here we've got all of the pages. So you can see we've got news content here. This is really important. We want you to be able to treat us as a really reliable go-to source, so that when something happens with legislation, whatever it is, you can come here and you can see and get some good links onward and understand what it is. There's also here, subscribe to the newsletter. I just want to say very quickly, if you view this on mobile, it all looks a tiny bit different, but if you see this button here, that takes you into those pages as well. So that little hamburger button, as they're called. These are our sort of focus statements, so you can see what we're choosing to focus on and what we believe is really important. This text here, really important. We're not just speaking for a few, we speak for thousands. Everyone, I think, in here knows this, right? But it can get lost. And we want to provide a platform for a more honest and open conversation. I'll come back to the testimonials because you can get to them from the top as well. So I'll just run you through the team really quickly. Well, we've introduced all of these people, but I can just, show our lovely pictures here. And I also just want to give a shout out as well to the press team at the bottom, which is me and Mary and Alex. Alex is doing our social media. Mary is writing a lot of these stories that you're seeing. The testimonials. Now, this is a map of different people who've come in with different testimonials. I think anyone here will know that if we tried to make it exhaustive, then there wouldn't be any world. It would just be circles. Well, particularly in the English-speaking countries, increasingly in continental Europe. So this is a sample, really, of different people's stories, and you can see that you can kind of go in and you can look at what people have said. And we're also including stories from parents whose young people have desisted, who are no longer seeking a trans identity. And you can also see a lot of the parents chose to kind of give us their political or religious affiliation. And that's important because one of the things, as you all know, that gets thrown at you is that you're far right, or that you're some kind of deeply evangelical person. In many ways, and that's just not true. So we're kind of spelling this all out. We've got a Catholic, we've got a lapsed Catholic, we've got this, we've got that, and it is a genuinely diverse group, as you will know from the support groups you're in, that it's not some kind of monolith. So have a look through those, and some of them are very inspiring, some of them are very sad. Our position, this is very, very well thought out. So this is the kind of long version, really long version of what you've just seen. It's quite encyclopedic. These statements, these policy positions, a lot of them will expand, as you can see. So you can read quite a lot more. As I said, these have been arrived at after many years for some people of very careful thought and consideration and a lot of reading around these topics. They're not just thrown up there. So this is pretty encyclopedic, and it's important for you if you want to know exactly why we're saying what we're saying, exactly why we believe X and not Y, then have a look at that, our position. Resources, it's a great list. So we've got parent support groups. Now, parent support groups, there are so many, we haven't got them all. And the other thing to say is that there are, in particular, the Gender Dysphoria Support Network and parents of ROGD kids who have so many groups, particularly parents of ROGD kids, that we're not going to list them all. So you can just link through to their central website. We know that they also have parents of ROGD kids, Australia and UK and so forth. There's some helpful organizations here, people who aren't support groups, but have been very much involved in this. So Scott's TRE Voices is there. We've got loads of different people, LGB groups, Safe School Alliance, Transgender Trend. And then down here, we've got some useful links. So we've got books, media articles. This is not exhaustive, it's curated. So the idea is like, these are the things that we think are really, really helpful. This is my series, for those who don't know, quick plug for myself, When Sons Become Daughters on Quillette, and all sorts of things here. So we've got scientific articles, we've got Stella's wonderful documentary, Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. We've got a parental guidance list. We've got podcasts, the Gender Wider Lens podcast, of course, all sorts of stuff. So have a look through those. News, you'll see, this is the story in more detail. So this is one I wrote about the politics of Genspect and what it actually means to be in this very political era, trying to hold together a coalition of the centre. all sorts of great stories here, and this will be updated with everything that we're doing, really. If you want to get in touch, hit the contact. You can email the press team, all other inquiries. And as I say, you've got your social media icons at the top. The subscribe, what you're subscribing to is you're subscribing to our newsletter. We'll also be giving you the occasional email alert. You won't be spammed. It won't be every day, I promise you, because that's very annoying. And also it gives us an opportunity to stay in contact with you. So if you subscribe as a parent, you check the box that says parent, and then we know how many parents there are who are supporting us, who are behind us. And I would just urge you all to subscribe. The other thing is, when you subscribe, make sure that you click the confirmation email. You always have to have a confirmation email, right? Because otherwise people could start subscribing other people. So do make sure that you go in and get that confirmation email done. So yeah, genspect.org, and have a play. Go in and just have a root around and see what you find.
Thank you, Angus. Thank you very much. Angus has been extraordinary in doing the visuals and doing all the text and stuff like that, and helping get Genspect off the ground. So it's been the two of us have been really pushing it the last week in particular, getting everything together. So it's like he's my new husband.
Okay, you need to tell your actual husband that, just so we don't get into a conflict.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
I should also point out, for those who don't know, that I am gay.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to kind of put in a message either to Angus, or if you want to kind of come on screen and talk or say something, and you can take off your screen, you know what I mean, you don't have to, you know what I mean, but if you want to, just put your hand up if you want to say anything, please. Yeah, Babby from Italy. Will I stop the recording? Or I think I'll stop the recording from now on, I think, because I think that would be the easiest way for people to talk freely.